Chapter 6, The Duel of Two Girls. Ray leaned against the wall, her face pale, her eyes red, and tears still lingering at the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom and Dad, I shouldn't have made you worry." The little girl pursed her lips in guilt, her heart filled with guilt, her eyes lowered. In this life, her parents were both good people. That was why Siddle's mentality had degenerated from a 16-year-old girl to a 7-year-old child, because they spoiled her too much. When they called the orphanage, the staff regretfully told Kelson that the person in charge of the records and the director were no longer in office. "Everyone is resting on the weekend, but tomorrow you can call the director directly to ask about that girl's records." The only way to get information was temporarily unavailable. Kelson and Ray prepared to take Siddle home first. "Maybe we shouldn't go home today," Siddle suggested. After all, in the house, besides Esther, there was also a bomb waiting to explode, Annabelle. She wanted to tell her parents clearly, actually, Annabelle. Siddle wanted to say that she really saw a ghost, but unfortunately, it seemed like her parents thought she was scared. "Siddle," Kelson comforted her, "don't be afraid, my dear. Don't you think I can't protect you?" But now the problem wasn't Esther. So Siddle could only silently grieve. If only Esther could be chased away, and conveniently let her take Annabelle with her, that would be great, she thought to herself. The car quickly returned to the villa. Ray held her hand, opened the villa door. The time had only been one day, but her mood was completely different from before. Siddle thought back to everything she had experienced from yesterday until now. Not only did she see a ghost, but she was also forced to fight with the green tea, who was most likely a murderer. Now her heart was so calm that nothing could make her heart ache anymore. Kelson parked the car. "Dad, go see Esther." Siddle raised his head. "I'll go with you." After pushing the door open, the room was a mess. Books were scattered everywhere. The brown curly-haired girl was sitting in the debris. Kelson called out. She slowly turned her head. Her pale little face was covered in tears. Her eyes were red and swollen. Her lips and clothes were covered in blood. "Dad?" She opened her mouth in confusion. Her eyes were empty. Tears fell down. "I'm sorry. If Siddle doesn't like my paintings, I will never draw them again. Please everyone, don't abandon me." Her hands and feet were covered in blood. Her hands were covered in dried blood and still trembling. "I draw and learn to play the piano all for the sake of getting everyone's attention. Don't abandon me." Kelson was shocked, couldn't care much, quickly walked over and hugged Esther in his arms, examining her wound. Siddle stood behind Esther, seeing Esther weakly leaning against Kelson's chest, who was clearly looking at her with a resentful gaze. Siddle smiled. Since they had already turned their cards face up, she immediately used a friendly sign language that was commonly used throughout the world with her. Seeing Esther's slightly distorted expression, Siddle was surprised to find that she had a strange feeling of joy. Could it be that she had awakened some strange attribute? The purple paintings on the wall had all been taken care of, and Esther's excuse was, because Siddle didn't like her paintings, she tore them all up. She was willing to sacrifice her own interests for Siddle. These excuses also successfully convinced Kelson. After Kelson helped Esther treat her wounds and clean up the room, Siddle saw Annabelle still lying on the ground. Her hair and dress were all messy and dirty. Looking at her appearance, she must have been brutally tortured. It must have become Esther's place to vent her anger. Siddle. She remembered the white shadow she saw at Esther's door earlier and was momentarily silent. "Not bad, there are a lot of people in here." It was almost late at night. Kelson had to comfort Esther for a while. Siddle quietly went downstairs to find Ray. After Kelson went downstairs, she stood up to ask how things were going. According to Kelson, Esther had burned all the paintings she brought here from the orphanage and thrown them in the trash. It's not easy to handle the adoption process, so, without any evidence, I don't think calling the police is a reasonable option. Kelson shrugged, refusing Siddle's suggestion to call the police, but, if you're scared, you can sleep with your parents. Siddle wasn't too disappointed. She had already guessed this outcome since she was watching Esther sell carpets. "Can you give me the spare key to our house?" After getting the key, Siddle refused her parents' suggestion to sleep together. Don't joke, if something really happened and the whole family was in one room, wouldn't they be exterminated? She repeatedly told Kelson and Ray to lock the door before going to bed. Siddle could clearly see the helplessness in her parents' eyes, but she really had no other choice. Kelson couldn't understand how his daughter could think that he would be harmed by a 9-year-old girl, even if she was a perverted girl with unpredictable intentions. After her parents returned to their room, Siddle hid the key and went to knock on Esther's door. Behind the door came the sound of running, and very quickly someone opened the door. After seeing Siddle, the smile on Esther's pale face disappeared, and she coldly asked, "What are you doing here?" "Sister, I want to wish you good night." Siddle innocently tilted her head, resentfully saying, "Why are you so cold to me? Is it because I made Father hate you?" "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, I'll explain to Father. I didn't expect you two to quarrel because of me." She sighed in admiration, and said with frustration, "I also didn't expect Father to care about me like this. The moment he saw me injured, he panicked to the point of not caring about your feelings. We're both Father's daughters, he shouldn't be so biased. I told Father to take care of Sister more, but he didn't listen, he only pampered me." Esther clenched her hands, the wound she caused herself that afternoon started to hurt again. She stared at Siddle resentfully, intending to raise her hand but reluctantly stopped. In the end, he could only purse his lips indignantly, calm his emotions, and was about to close the door when he suddenly heard the little girl say, "Sister, you really get angry easily. You don't think you're a princess, do you?" Seeing Esther's pupils constrict, Siddle looked innocent and sneered, "When a princess is sick, people call it princess disease. But someone like you is called wild chicken syndrome. You even cherish a few pieces of rags like treasures. Were you so poor that you had to beg for food before? You're so powerful, one look and you can tell you grew up in loneliness, right? Now you look as pale as a ghost, so ugly, no one wants to adopt you, only my father took you in as a charity. When he took you out, people thought my house was a garbage collection place, he dared to bring any rotten fish or shrimp home." Oh! Bang! The door closed. Siddle stood outside the door and tilted her head, remembering Esther's expression. Her eyes were so angry that she couldn't do anything, being provoked to the point of her face turning black. She returned to her room with satisfaction. Pfft, her fighting spirit was a bit weak. Siddle didn't forget to lock the door, then checked the spare key before obediently getting under the covers, turning off the desk lamp and preparing to sleep. Although she had a lot of things to do these past 2 days, she still ate when she should eat, and slept when she should sleep. The quality of life couldn't be reduced. On the other hand, it wasn't possible to be so calm and harmonious on the other side. After closing the door, Esther was about to lose control of her anger. Her expression changed form, and immediately vented all her anger on the doll Siddle had given her. After Annabelle was dried by Kelson and placed back on the bookshelf, her white dress was still stained with Esther's blood, and now it was violently thrown to the ground. Esther naturally turned it into Siddle's substitute, beating it to the point that the clever braid was messed up, and there were even a few footprints on its face. Crack! Annabelle's face was kicked to the side, her blue eyes covered in dust staring intently at the foot of the bed. Esther finished venting her anger, panting as she picked up Annabelle and put her back on the bookshelf. She turned back to bed, closed her eyes, her long eyelashes trembled violently. She swore, sooner or later she would kill that damned bitch. She wanted to use the most cruel means, to make that bitch regret everything she had done today. She had to make her kneel down and admit her mistakes. In the darkness, Annabelle's blue-gray eyes slowly became congested, her white pupils were covered with blood vessels. While Esther was thinking about how to torture Siddle, she didn't notice that the surrounding temperature was dropping. Late at night, Esther woke up. She didn't know why she woke up. The moment she woke up, a feeling of frustration filled her head. She was very thirsty. The cold in the room made her shiver involuntarily. Why was it so cold? The strange temperature in the room gradually made Esther sober up. She wrapped herself in the blanket and sat up, wanting to turn on the light, but when she turned her head, she suddenly saw a person with long hair and a white dress standing beside her. It was a little girl, her hair reaching her waist, the skin on her forehead and under her dress was cracked and torn, revealing the bright red flesh inside. Her eyes were covered in red blood. At this moment those two red pearls were staring at her. Esther was horrified to see the little girl covered in blood. Before she could make a sound, the little girl suddenly crawled over from the bed. The frightened scream was stuck in her throat. Esther fumbled and retreated, falling under the bed with a thud. She ran out while absent-mindedly remembering the people she had killed. The woman whose head she had stabbed with a knife would forever remain in her dream. Her entire family was burned alive by her, including the two children. If she had known earlier that there were ghosts in this world, she would never have acted so easily. But it seemed like she no longer had the chance to repent. Esther ran to the door, reached out to open it, shook it twice, and found that someone had locked it from the outside. She couldn't open it. The cold air behind her approached. Esther turned her head in panic and despair. The little girl covered in blood flew towards her quickly. A few faint footprints could still be seen on both sides of her cheeks.